that it would not call for further amenities to apply to become part of the regime until some further work had been done around what sort of amenities and the criteria we would set around that. Now that work hasn't been done as of yet.
Yes. Has there been any applications that are self-initiated rather than called for by us to share in the fund?
I get a regular stream, if not frequent stream, of inquiries from organisations, so I could probably rattle off sort of half a dozen, 10-ish organisations that have approached me.
So if we were to call for other invitations, you'd be opening up a Pandora's box, and unless you didn't have a considerably larger fund, it would be a case of dividing the pie up in increasingly small amounts. And what has the council actually made a decision about that, or is it just a constant process of thinking about it?
Life's slightly got in the way of that work, and that there was, after council made that decision, there was other things associated with the levy that of the ARAFA regime that got in the way. There was a court case and some other work around reviewing the legislation or the funding mechanism that was done by council. That was all sort of completed towards the end of the last political term. So if this new council wanted to do some work to actively think about what criteria would be put around inviting new amenities, then you could instruct us to do that work, and we would undertake that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Just further to the questioning of the Mayor, can the converse position, which is, can groups or have groups ever been uninvited?
Good luck.
No, but likewise there is a process around that where amenities that are currently within the regime have to continue to meet the criteria set out within the legislation for being a regional amenity, and the funding board itself has a bit of a watching brief over that.
Councillor Newman.
Alistair, isn't it an opportunity actually, if we want to address the whole issue of who's in and who's out, to probably give some thought to asking central government to repeal this act, because this act is an anomaly of the under Auckland Council, because it is a pre-amalgamation device to ensure funding to these groups. Would that be a reasonable statement?
We're lurching dangerously to the political, but yes, there would be that opportunity.
So, I mean, sorry, so there's a group, there's more of these applicants coming back next month, is there?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if there's an opportunity for the officers to go away and to consider this issue, because I think I'd like to foreshadow at the next meeting that I think we should be putting up an amendment, not only in terms of seeking the repeal of this Act to central government, but also to move to develop a different framework for consideration of applications, including for new groups. Because the thing is about these funding applications, look, I fully support them, but there's other groups out there that are just as worthy. And the whole notion of this Legacy Act was that it was about ensuring that certain organisations would be funded by the legacy councils through this device. Now that we've been amalgamated, this device isn't required. We have the ability to develop policy, and we should be able to develop policy to fund these groups, and we don't need this board, in accordance with this dated piece of law, to be making recommendations on this basis. So could the officers give some consideration to some work around this, so that we might be able to consider this in the future?
It is a work in progress, but I'm just going to get Phil. Thank you.
Listening to the discussion, my encouragement would be to separate this discussion that you're having today about the submission and the immediate funding round, clearly the idea of legislative change and more fundamental reform is something that's going to take time. So I would discourage you from conflating the two things. I do believe we should bring that advice through about the legislative framework. It is a complex area. Whether it happens at exactly the same time as we're talking about the addition of new amenities or what process and principles might underlie your consideration of that, I'll take offline and discuss with Alistair and Ed, but I'm very happy to bring through that wider debate, but my guidance is let's not mix it up with the immediate need to get a funding round sorted.
Yeah, just following up, Mr Chair, and I don't wish to appear like I am conflating the two. I'm looking for a vehicle for that debate to be had because I think it's a fair discussion to be had.
Yep.
We do need, I think, to address this legacy issue. I would like to be able to think about what are the amenities that do need to be covered and what additional amenities do need to be considered. And I think that putting together a case for that would be very helpful when taking this issue to Parliament for the purpose of Parliament considering whether in fact this legislation which predates amalgamation is fit for purpose.
So we will work on that advice and a process perhaps of workshopping that with you and bringing it back through this committee.
When will that be?
I should just emphasise, though, that you're not alone, Councillor Newman, in
Well, that's good.
thinking about this because it has been discussed and there is an awareness that we need to have a review.
Supplementary to the question, I wonder whether Mr Wilson, just following on from the Chair, whether Mr Wilson can confirm that this has been a discussion that we've had for 6 years but made little progress on.
That's correct, but I'm very mindful that some of those questions have not been tested with this governing body in this term.
Only been here for
Only bit just arrived.
I would ask, I'm not sure if you're inclined to resolve anything formally here, but I think it would be appropriate for us to report back within 3 months on that, having done some of that work.
I'd second that.
And I don't think we need a resolution for this. This is an LTP issue, and that's where it will be resolved. Along with looking at other of our institutions that aren't on this list, and we've clearly got a lot with RFA, a lot that council supports directly. So it's actually quite a Pandora's box to get into. So, Councillor Casey.
I don't care who answers it, Alistair. It's with regard to your paragraph 21, which I don't support. I'm interested in some discussion about it. This is the staff's need to put the ARAFA board or to benchmark the ARAFA board with our council-controlled organisations, and I'm really concerned about that because, one, it will lead to an increase in their salary for sure because all our CCOs are very well paid at board level. And I don't know that if by approving the submission, I see in the submission it just refers to the funding of board members on page 37. So there's a 1.7% increase for the chair, deputy chair and members. But Alistair, could you explain please why we are benchmarking our ARAFA board, why you want us to benchmark the ARAFA board with our CCOs?
Just as a clarification, they're not benchmark the ARAFA board against our CCOs, but later this year we will be doing a piece of work looking at remuneration of the CCOs, and what we're suggesting here is that in that process we also look at the remuneration that the ARAFA board members receive to see if we can find an appropriate benchmark. I guess in the past, by default almost, we've sort of compared with the remuneration received by the MOTAT and the War Memorial boards, because they seem to be sort of similar types of legislation, although vastly different decision-making roles. But I guess what we want to do is actually go through a process to try to find some advice for you about what is appropriate remuneration for the ARAFA board members. It comes up in the annual plan that they submit to us what they want their remuneration to be for the coming years. There's a modest increase proposed this year. I don't feel that we can provide you with good advice on that at this stage, but that we should do some further work when we do the CCO Director Remuneration Review. Also include these directors in it so that we can give you some sound advice as to what is appropriate remuneration.
I'm not happy with that. I'm interested to hear what my colleagues think. I haven't heard that the Arafa board is unhappy with the 1.7% increase, and we're going to have to consult on that. And I heard what you said, but I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah. Just to be clear, the increase that the Arafa board members, that is what the Arafa board is proposing that they receive. It's not suggested by council or staff.
That's right. So why would we? What you actually say in here, although you say it's not benchmarking, that is actually what you say in the report. It says here, we propose to include the Arafa board in this review so that council can benchmark what would be appropriate remuneration for the Arafa board members. Well, as far as I'm concerned, they're getting appropriately remunerated, and we're going to consult over that. So I don't see the next level. I'm not supportive of it at all.
All I'm trying to signal there, and you don't have to follow our advice, is that we should do some work to look at what council believes should be appropriate remuneration, and that work could well determine that what is proposed by the Arafa is appropriate remuneration.
I don't see the need for that benchmarking, Alistair, that's what I'm saying. And certainly not against the CCO boards.
Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thanks, Mr Chairman. Acknowledge what Councillor Newman said and Phil Wilson's response. I think that's important that we keep that separation, but the piece of work certainly does need to be done. But also, in fairness to all the organisations here, they're actually regionalising themselves to a far greater extent anyway, from being virtually city-centric 10 years ago. They are now actually, there are fingers of work going out into the north, south, east and west of this great city. So that needs to be recognised as part of this, that the work that they are actually doing to spread their work out. And also, you've got to talk about the museum as well on their work, and they need to be congratulated. So it certainly is a piece of work that needs to be studied, but we need to make sure we've got the complete context of their KPIs and what their work programs going forward actually do look like.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Just wanted to really record support for Councillor Newman's initiative and the follow-through work that Mr Wilson's said he'll undertake to look at the legislation, just so reinforcing Councillor Cashmore's points there as well. But I do have a question just around the criteria I heard mentioned. Is it possible to have performance-type measures tied to these grants for these organisations to meet? Councillor Cashmore just mentioned about KPIs, something similar to that we could tie the grant to as a condition.
In short, no, it's not. Council's role is simply to set the funding principles, and we have the board who look after the individual grants to the amenities.
What I would just add to that, one of the funding principles that council did add, I think back in about 2012, was that the amenities should adopt KPIs which align to Auckland Plan outcomes. However, council has no formal role in monitoring those KPIs just because of the way the legislation is set up.
Thank you.
Vern, do you want to make any comments?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Look, nothing specific except to say that the whole issue around the Act was brought to, I think, the previous council and perhaps the previous council before that as well. And we've always made the offer that we're happy to partake in that conversation with you around a mechanism that will ensure that the amenities who are recognised as being paramount to Auckland, that they do continue to exist. From our perspective, the board is a mechanism for ensuring that. If there is a better mechanism, we're only too happy to support any initiative that council wishes to progress.
In your time as chair for 6 years, Vern, has the board had approaches informally from other groups that you would consider that there are some out there that should be added or could be added to this?
Yes, we certainly have, but as Alistair mentioned, council made a decision, I think 4 or 5 years ago that they would not entertain looking at any additional amenities at this stage.
Right, Councillor Collins.
Sir, is it right to make a comment on this? It's not a question. I've asked my question. I just wanted to note a couple of concerns that I have, and I endorse what Councillor Newman was talking about looking at a review and getting more of a scope on this and possibly advancing the idea of repealing this particular act. But one of my concerns here is that I'm of the view that this kind of funding, if it's going to these amenity groups, should lead to access. There is a huge online discussion going on Facebook at the moment in South Auckland about how unaffordable one of the a showing from the Arts Festival is going to be, $25 per adult. Now, I know that that's starting to get into in depth around some of the